Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Ships of Naval Action. Today we are taking a look at a bigger ship. This is the HMS Agamemnon, or the Eggs and Bacon. So as usual we are going to begin with the history of the Agamemnon, and that begins all the way back in 1777 when she was ordered and she was commissioned in the 28th of March 1781 and launched a few days later on the 10th of April of the same year, of course. During this time, the British were also going a bit of a phase, and they had a phase of naming their ships after members of Greek mythology, or prominent figures in Greek mythology, and the Agamemnon is a result of that. And, you know, she is named after King Agamemnon of the Siege of Troy in ancient history, mythology. We don't know if it's true, but King Agamemnon. That's what the ship is named after. Being launched in 1781, the Agamemnon was launched in the middle of the American Revolutionary War. And the British Admiralty had received intelligence that a large convoy was preparing to sail from Brest to the West Indies, which would be the Americans. And the Agamemnon was part of a fleet that would go ahead and intercept this, and the British would do that. A few months later, after the successful intercept, in 1782, the Agamemnon would sail to the West Indies, which, as I said, the Americas, where she would be taking part in the Battle of the Saints, where she would suffer a couple of casualties, but other than that, she was alright, nothing bad happened to her. Following the Treaty of Versailles in 1783, which brought an end to the Anglo-French War, the Agamemnon returned to Chatham from the West Indies, and she would be docked for repairs and have her copper sheathing replaced, and following getting out of dock in 1784, she was laid up in ordinary, which is basically mothballed because she wasn't of use because Britain was at peace, so why would they pay for an expensive ship when they didn't need her? Peace would not last long, however, as the French were starting to feel a bit heated, as a certain King Louis got his head chopped off by a guillotine. And the Agamemnon was recommissioned in preparation for the British to join in on the French Revolutionary War. A certain famous captain would take charge of the Agamemnon, Captain Horatio Nelson. After provisioning, she would join the fleet anchored at the Nore, and they would all sail to join the Mediterranean fleet under the Vice Admiral Hood, which was blockading the French port of Toulon, which later Toulon would announce their allegiance to the royalist cause, and they would sail in, capture some British ships, some French ships, where Agamemnon was sent to Naples to ask King Ferdinand for reinforcements, which they got 4,000 of. In 1794, the Agamemnon, led by Nelson, would help capture some Corsican towns, and that was her task for a bit, where she was just messing around in Corsica until the Corsica declared themselves to be subjects of His Majesty King III. In 1795, the first chance of glory came to the Agamemnon when she would take part in the Battle of Genoa, when a French fleet comprising of 15 ships of the line was sighted. The Agamemnon would be in the battle, guns blazing. However, at some point, Admiral Hotham would signal the British ships to retreat as more French ships arrived, which he would end up getting criticized for. The British did, however, manage to capture two ships, the Saïra as well as the Censeur. Later in July on that same year, while accompanying a bunch of frigates, a squadron of frigates to be exact, Agamemnon was chased by a French fleet of 22 ships of the line and 6 frigates, and due to adverse winds, Admiral Hotham was unable to come to her aid. However, a few days later, the fleet was sighted again off of Hires Island, where Hotham signaled for his 23 ships of the line to give chase. And ensuing battles of Hires Island occurred, and Agamemnon was one of the few Royal Navy ships to engage the enemy fleet. However, Admiral Hotham would strike again, and he would announce that they should retreat. He signaled his fleet to retreat. And the French were able to escape, and Admiral Hotham was again greatly criticized for this move, and it ended up with him being relieved as Commander-in-Chief, and Admiral Sir John Jervis would be the new admiral at the end of the year. In 1796, Nelson was promoted to Commodore, which is a temporary rank in the British Navy at the time, and later he would transfer his pennant to the HMS Captain, meaning that Nelson would no longer be stationed aboard the Agamemnon. Truly an end of an era for the Agamemnon. In 1797, the Agamemnon was involved in the Nore Mutiny. However, most of her crew would be acquitted after all of the hardline mutineers were kicked off the ship and her captain were able to secure pardons for the remaining mutineers. Nothing more would really befall to the Agamemnon until 18th of March 1800, when Agamemnon hit some rocks. She ran onto the Penmark rocks, and, well, she came into full mount on the 25th of March 1800. On her way to port, she would encounter the Childers, which assisted her, and she would also get assistance from 2 sloops, the guard ship Chatham and troops from Pendennis Castle at the pumps, and the crews managed to stop the water level in the hold from raising any further, but she was in quite a tricky situation. Agamemnon made her way for Plymouth for repairs. However, that movement kinda caused the leaks to gain on the men at the pumps again, and when she was off at Painley Point, Agamemnon fired a gun for assistance, and she was lashed to a sheer hulk to prevent her from sinking, and they managed to save her from sinking. In 1801, things would start heating up for the Agamemnon, in specific in the Baltic Sea, so the Danish would essentially threaten Britain's naval supply, as they were getting a bit not so happy with the British, let's say. So Agamemnon would accompany a fleet to the Battle of Copenhagen, or Schopenhaven as it is in Danish, where the first Battle of Schopenhaven would happen, where Agamemnon would end up running aground. Yay. In 1802, the Agamemnon was laid up at Chatham as the Treaty of Amiens concluded the Revolutionary War. However, peace wouldn't last too much, since the Napoleonic Wars would be coming very soon. Of course, war isn't great for most people. However, for the Agamemnon, not that she is a person, it was great because in 1802 she was practically unusable. She was falling apart. However, the Napoleonic War started and the British needed more ships. So, what does that mean? Well, Agamemnon survived. She was put right back in service. Agamemnon would take part in the Battle of Cape Finisterre, where she would have 3 men wounded and lose her topmast and mizzenmast. And Calder's fleet, who was the admiral, Robert Calder, the action was discontinued, so no decisive battle was formed during the Battle of Cape Finisterre. A few months later, the Agamemnon would sail to join Vice Admiral Nelson, who was blockading Villeneuve's combined fleet in Cadiz. En route, however, Agamemnon fell in with a French squadron consisting of 6 ships of the line and several smaller vessels, which gave chase, which is not an ideal situation since the Agamemnon was just a 64 gun ship of the line. However, they managed to evade, and Agamemnon joined the blockading squadron on the 13th of October, and when Nelson laid eyes on the approaching ship, he reportedly exclaimed, "Here comes that damned fool Berry, now we shall have a battle." On the 20th of October, the day before the Battle of Trafalgar, Agamemnon captured a large American merchant brig, which he then took in tow. Not long after, however, she was signaled by the HMS Aurelius that she was sailing towards a fleet of 30 ships. Well, Villeneuve had just left port, and things were about to get interesting. The 21st of October, 1815, Agamemnon took part in the Battle of Trafalgar. Agamemnon was positioned 8th in the Nelson's weather column, with Orion ahead and Minotaur astern. She was firing both batteries when she engaged the line, which of course Nelson broke the line in 2, and she was pounding the great Spanish four-decker, the Nuestra Señora de la Santísima Trinidad, a mouthful. And the Santissima got demasted by Agamemnon, and with 216 men, she struck her colors. However, before Berry, who was the captain of the Agamemnon at the time, could take possession of the prize, the enemy van division began bearing down on the British line, which was not really ideal. Thomas Hardy, captain of the fleet, ordered Agamemnon and several other ships to intercept the van, and therefore Agamemnon wasn't able to take possession of the Santissima. They intercepted them, however 3 ships broke off and ran for Cadiz. What's extraordinary, however, is just how many casualties the Agamemnon took. The Agamemnon had 2 fatalities and 8 men wounded, which is very little. So, if you don't know, a 64 gunner in 1805, she was barely a ship of the line. 64 gunners, they didn't really have a place in the line of battle anymore, but the Agamemnon was part in the Trafalgar and only had 10 casualties, I guess, 2 deaths and 8 wounded. Pretty good. Following the battle, however, Agamemnon was taking on a lot of water. She took the Colossus under tow to Gibraltar, and there she carried out repairs and joined Collingwood's squadron, which resumed the blockade of Cadiz. In 1806, being repaired and everything, she would take part in the Battle of San Domingo, where Agamemnon assisted Duckworth's flagship Superb in driving the French Vice Admiral Lesugier's flagship onto the shore where the ship was wrecked. And in October, Agamemnon escorted a convoy on her return to Britain. In 1807, you would have the Second Battle of Copenhagen, where, just like she did in 1801, the Agamemnon, not Copenhagen, the Agamemnon would run aground. Yay. Agamemnon, however, would be able to land free, get some guns into Sherga Bay, and form a battery which would besiege the city, where the Danes surrendered 7th of September. In 1808, while in a mission to Brazil, it was discovered that the Agamemnon was quite worn out and in very poor state. She was busy with a mission for a surgeon, Dr. James Persuan, to Montevideo, where he was tasked with exposing a plot against King John VI of Portugal, who was at the time in exile in Brazil. And while in Brazil, the Agamemnon would run aground at the River Plate, where she would not be able to be survived, and she would not be able to be survived. She would not be able to survive. She ended up being lost because of her poor state. There was no saving her. And that's the end of the history of the Agamemnon. In 1993, the wreck was located, and yeah, she lies there. Dead. Well, dead. Not living. A wreck. She is a wreck. But that covers the entire history of the Agamemnon. Now I guess it's time for her in naval action. In naval action, just in real life, the Agamemnon is a 64-gun ship of the line, mounting 24-pound guns on her bottom gun deck, 18-pound guns on her middle gun deck, and 9-pound guns on her top gun deck. She is a solid ship in naval action. She isn't particularly fast, she isn't slow either. 64 guns, she is a 4th rate in naval action, which puts her in competition with the Constitution, the Agamemnon, the Vasa, which is a 3rd rate in game, but she has the same amount of guns. The Agamemnon, she doesn't have the biggest gun, so the Agamemnon, for example, has 32-pounders, which are bigger, more powerful. But 24-pounders, they're still solid, so she does have a decent broadside. Not as big as the 3rd rates, which come later, but regardless, they are quite solid. So, the Agamemnon, I think she is a pretty ship. I'm keeping this pretty short. She is a 64 gunner, so she has a decent armament. However, I do find that she is a bit in the middle, I think. Like, the 3rd rates pack a lot more punch while being a bit bigger, while something like the Constitution is a lot faster and a lot more mobile while still packing a decent punch. So the Agamemnon is kind of a bit in the middle where she isn't quite useful. But she is still a solid ship. She has 24-pounders, can do a lot of damage. She has decent hull armor. She has a decent amount of crew, 500 men. It's not the most men, but it's a decent amount. So she is a solid ship. She also has bow chasers and stern chasers. But I think overall there are better alternatives out there. Like, I would personally rather take something like the Vasa or the Constitution, depending on the situation. Or maybe even one of my favorite ships, the Admiral de Ruyter. But of course the Admiral de Ruyter is quite significantly more bigger ship. Anyways, I do hope you all enjoyed this quick video on the Agamemnon. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe and all of that. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye!